All right, it's 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Doing all right, in the middle of having every exam possible this week.
I'm sure it must be a really busy week for you guys. So, you know, I see that, you know, we have a little bit less people than normal. So, you know, for those of you who came by, you know, thank you very much. And, you know, best of luck on everything in this week. So I know it's going to be a tough week before Thanksgiving, but you know, after this week, at least we have Thanksgiving. And then you can catch up on all your other work. That's kind of how it is. You know, I remember when I was in college and my professors would be like, "Oh, it's Thanksgiving. You guys are gonna have fun with your family and hang out and all that stuff." I'm like, no, this is the time we catch up on and everything. So, you know, I know how it is, but you know, hang in there, guys. You know, we're almost at the end of this semester. I'm doing good. Yeah, it's you know, I'm definitely feeling the end of semester tiredness, but you know, I think it's kind of the same thing for everyone. Yeah. Okay. And so what do I want to say first? So what I want to say first is that I did grade the midterm exams end of last week. Okay. I forgot what the average was. Let me go check really quick. Midterm 2 statistics. All right. So the average was, let's see, 37 out of 50. So it is a bit lower than the first exam, which is expected. You know, that's kind of how it is for this class. First exam, I think, you know, this average is pretty high. And then, you know, for the second exam, the average comes back down to earth a little bit, just because, you know, the second exam stuff is, you know, a lot more difficult than the first exam. But overall, you know, I think you guys did really well. Okay. And so, you know, I'm pretty sure I know it was kind of a little bit of a mess at the end of the exam, you know, with exam closing out and everything, but I'm pretty sure I got everyone's email responses and everything. So I'm pretty sure I factored all that in. But you know, if I miss anything, or if I made any mistakes grading your exam, then please let me know as soon as possible. I try to be, you know, more detailed than usual with my comments on this exam. And so, you know, if you have any questions on that, or if you feel like you deserve more points, then, you know, please let me know. Okay. All right. So that's the first announcement. Second announcement is with regards to the project. And so I see that, you know, the majority of students in the class have already signed up for a project group. And so that's great. You know, I'm very happy about that. But I think there are still a few students that don't have a group yet. And so I know that a couple of you have contacted me, you know, asking me to help you help put you into a group. And I've reached out to a couple groups to see if they're willing to take extra members. And so if you're part of a group and then you've got an email from me asking about adding a member, then, you know, please respond just to make sure that it's okay. And for those of you who are not part of a group yet, or you haven't reached out to me, you know, please form one really quickly, because it's, you know, we're already in week 13, and you know, the final presentation is going to take place in week 16. And so I want to make sure that you guys have enough time to, you know, to do the research, and then also to put together the slides. And then eventually the final report as well. Okay. And so, you know, I think, so I'm looking at the spreadsheet right now. It looks like we have 7 groups. And so I think there's, I expected to have 8 groups. And so there should be one more group of 5 there. And then not every group is full too. And so, you know, I think there are still a few students that are not signed up yet. And for the groups that are formed, remember tonight, I want you to email me that agreement of shared responsibilities. Okay. And so by midnight tonight, you know, I want you guys to discuss with your group, and you know, discuss how you're going to, you know, split up the work, make sure everyone does it equally. And I want every group to send me that by midnight. You know, just so that, you know, everyone's on the same page in what they're expected to do for the final project. Okay. And I'll put out an announcement on that after this as well. Okay. All right. And so I think that's it for my announcements. And so are there any other questions I can answer or anything before we get started? Okay. All right. And so let's go ahead and get started. And so let's go ahead and pick up where we left off last Tuesday. And so it's been a week since we met, because last Thursday was Veterans Day. And so I want to spend a little bit of time today, you know, kind of reviewing kind of the most important points of what we went over last time, and then kind of continuing on that trend, because we're about halfway through our lecture notes on risk and safety. All right. And so, you know, picking up where we left off on Tuesday, we're very much within the portion of this class that has to do with engineering ethics. Okay, and so remember, we moved on from economics, and now we're talking about ethics. And we talked about risk and safety as being, probably the most important aspect of engineering ethics that we can do. Okay, because at the end of the day, you're, no matter kind of where you work or what you end up doing in engineering, you're going to be making products or designing products that people are going to use. And with that, comes a big responsibility to keep the people safe, or at least the ones that use your product. Okay. And so this should always be your number one priority, whenever you're designing anything that someone's going to use. Okay. And you have to think about, not just the safety of the people using your product, but if it's going to affect other people as well, you need to consider that too. Okay. And so last time we came up with 4, I would say, main points that you can follow, or 4 main guidelines that you can have. To kind of help you keep safety first in mind for your products. Okay. All right. So number 1 was to comply with any applicable laws. Okay. And so, and we'll discuss this more today, that, that the government, is responsible, also partially responsible for keeping their citizens safe. And so part of that is, they're going to write laws to regulate your engineering technology. Okay. And so you want to make sure that you follow those laws first and foremost. Okay. Okay. Beyond the law, there's also what we consider to be accepted engineering practice. Okay, so these are like your engineering standards put out, by the professional engineering societies. Okay, and so these often are going to be a little bit more strict than the law because these are written by engineers. So these are written by people who really understand the technology and want it to be safe as well. Okay, and so beyond the law, you should also make sure that your products or your work complies with these engineering standards. Okay. Okay. Next, you're going to explore potentially safer designs. Okay. Right. And so you should always be thinking about this, and so you should always be thinking, is there a way for me to make this product safer than it already is? Okay. And this is where, remember we had our lecture on entrepreneurial thinking, right? And so just because a product works well and is safe right now, doesn't mean that you can't improve it and make it better. Okay. And so that's always something good to keep in mind. Right. And number 4 is to predict, any kind of potential misuses that your customers might do. Okay. And so this is, always a fun one to talk about, because some people can do really crazy stuff with some of their products. And so you kind of put yourself in the shoes of your customers and think, what is the craziest way that they can use this, And how can you protect them from doing that? That's always also a good mindset to have as well. Okay. And so if you follow these 4 steps right here, even though they're extremely broad, and they're not really specific to any particular field, but having these mindsets and having these kind of in the back of your head whenever you're designing something is always a good mindset to have. And then of course, a lot of the details on how these are performed, like the specific engineering standards and the technical details of exploring safer designs, those are filled in on a case-by-case basis, depending on your field and depending on the products. Okay. All right, and so with that in mind, I want to do an activity. Okay. So this is the activity that I wanted to do at the end of class last time, but we kind of ran out of time. And so I want to do an activity where I kind of split you guys off into groups, and you basically characterize the risk and talk about the risk of using some of these products. Okay, and so let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and so can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so I'm gonna split everyone up into different breakout rooms, and depending on the number of the breakout room, I want you to consider a certain product. Okay, so let's see how many people do we have. Right now we have 33 people, and so let's do breakout. Let's do 8. Let's do 8 breakout rooms. Okay, and so we'll have about 4 people per breakout room. Okay. And so depending on the number of your breakout room, you're going to consider a certain product here, okay? And so if your breakout room number 1, you're going to look at motorcycles. Breakout room number 2, you're going to look at RVs. Number 3, you're going to look at helicopters, and so on and so forth, up until number 8, which is microwave, okay? And I want you to answer basically these four points right here, okay? And so first of all, considering the product that you have, I want you to characterize the risk that is involved with using that product. Okay, and so I want you to think about, what are the main safety concerns? Are these risks voluntary? And so is the customer or is the consumer, are they aware of all these risks and are they voluntarily signing up for them? Okay, and I want you to think about some of the consequences too. And so what are some of the short-term, long-term, reversible, delayed, immediate consequences? Okay, right. Next, I want you to look up some applicable laws and accepted engineering practice that promote safety of the products. Okay, and so definitely you can use Google for this one, and so look things up if you have to. Okay. Number 3, and so I know a lot of these are pretty established products, but I want you to be creative and think about are there any ways that you can improve the design based on what it is right now. Okay. Oh. I think someone's mic is on right now. You have a question? Okay. All right. I'm just gonna mute you there. Okay. All right. And so number 4, and I want you to think about what are some possible ways that this product can be misused. Okay. And so that one's always a fun one. And so I think what people have done in the past is they looked at their product and they Googled, craziest thing to happen with a microwave. And then, lots of really fun stories come up. Okay. All right. And so, if you kind of have trouble, and so I'm going to try to project the screen to all the different rooms. But, if you have any trouble remembering these things, basically those are the 4 points that we just went over right now. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and split up the rooms. Breakout rooms. Okay. All right, so I'm going to open up the rooms, and then once you get into your rooms, then you can start discussing, okay? All right. All right. Looks like everyone's coming back. All right, welcome back, everybody. How's your discussions?
They were nice.
Good, good. All right, so I did want to take a couple minutes just to share some interesting ones. And so, I'll just let you guys talk. And so usually the fun one is number 4. And so did anyone find any fun stories about someone misusing one of these products?
I couldn't find it. Dang.
Oh, I couldn't find anything? Oh, yeah. Man.
For just number 4?
Or anything, I say number 4 because that's usually the one people want to share. But anything interesting that you guys discussed for these, anything you want to share.
I have a personal experience.
Sure, go ahead, go for it.
So my group was talking about like power strips or whatever, but I used to have like this super busted old. I mean, I have a new one now, luckily, but I used to have like a super old power strip that was like easily like my family's had for years. And I just remember like it was just like a common occurrence that whenever I would try to plug anything into it, it would just like throw out sparks.
Ooh.
And it's like I remember like the thing that inevitably made me end up, but like it still worked, but the thing that made me inevitably end up like getting rid of it was the fact that I like plugged something in and then like literally like all like first of all like the sparks went everywhere and then like all the lights in my room just like turned off. And I was like, and I had to like go outside and go to like the electrical component in the back of my house, and I had to like redo I had to like fix that. But yeah, so after that, I was like, I think it's time to get a new one. So
sounds like a good idea. Yeah, I'm glad your house was okay.
I'm glad I didn't light anything on fire.
It's good. It's good. All right. Does someone else want to share? I heard someone else turn on their mic before that. No.
Oh, no, it's just when you mentioned the misuse stuff, the first thing that caught my eye that would probably be misused greatly was like the propane barbecue tanks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I just searched up just misuse with that alone. And there's like first 3 articles are just explosions.
Yep.
So,
yeah, that definitely tends to happen. So it's, there's a reason why those, if you're going to fill up propane or any kind of flammable gas, it's in a very heavy duty container, but even then people find ways to blow stuff up with it. So yeah. All right. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And so hopefully what you see is that for any product that you use, there's always going to be risks involved with it. And as an engineer that's going to be designing these products, it's always important to be aware of these risks so that you can design around it. Okay. All right. So with that, let me go ahead and bring back the iPad. Okay. Okay, and so we're going to move on to the next set of lecture notes, which is, again deals with risk and safety, but we're gonna look at it from a little bit of a different perspective. Okay. Okay. All right, and so we've been talking about risk and safety and most importantly that it's impossible to eliminate all risk from a situation, right? And so we talked about that last time that as an engineer, it's not your job to make it so that no one ever sees sparks or lights their house on fire from power strips, right? That's impossible. Someone's going to do it out there. But your job is always to minimize the amount of risk, but also determine what is an acceptable amount of risk for using a given product or a given situation. Okay. Okay. Because there's always going to be risks, right? And so if you design a car, if someone steps into a car that you design, they're going to be putting their life at risk to some degree. Okay. And so if we have this notion, or if we have this kind of mindset of what is an acceptable level of risk, given what there is out there, then this is another good mindset to have when you're designing your products. Okay, and there's a lot of different perspectives, and so the whole idea of acceptable risk. There's kind of there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this, and so I wanted to talk about a few different approaches, so that we can compare which ones and see which ones are most appropriate in a given situation. Okay, all right. And so first, let's talk about an ethical theory that we discussed, at the very beginning of our ethics unit, which is utilitarianism. Right. And so if you recall, the whole, theory of utilitarianism is to, what they want to do is they want to maximize the well-being of society as a whole. Okay, and so they basically want to provide the maximum amount of good for the maximum amount of people. Okay, and so under this umbrella or under this mindset, we can come up with a definition for acceptable risk. Okay, all right, and so under this theory, we can say that a risk is acceptable if the product of the probability and magnitude of harm is equal to or less than is less than or equal to the product of the probability and magnitude of the benefit. Okay. And so, from a utilitarian point of view, this idea of acceptable risk, they take it as a very kind of, I think of it as like a very cold and calculating perspective, right? And so basically what they're doing is they have basically a formula for this, right? Okay. And so what they're doing is they're taking the product where you take, the percent chance or the probability that harm is going to occur, and you multiply that by the magnitude of the harm. Okay. And so if this is less than or equal to the probability of benefit, multiplied by the magnitude of the benefit, okay. If this condition is met, then we can say that risk is an acceptable one to take. Okay. And so if you have numbers for all these things, then it's a very clear-cut way to define it. Okay. But of course, it has its flaws, that we'll go over on the next page. But if you're in an engineering situation where you can quantify these things, really, really easily, then this is a good one. This is a good one to use because it's very, it's very cut and dry. Or there's no ambiguity with it. Assuming the numbers are accurate, and you can use this to justify a risk that you can take in your engineering practice. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. But of course, this way of thinking is flawed because a lot of harms, can't really be quantified for a lot of people. And there's also a lot of difficulties in predicting what the probability is for all these things too. Okay. Okay. So usually the term and the previous equation that's hard to define is the magnitude of the harm, right? And so how do you really put that into into numbers? Okay. And so traditionally, when people think about this, when you say that, how do we put a price on maiming someone, or how do we put a price on on harming someone? Usually, what they do is that they quantify it based on the price of any kind of medical treatments or hospital visits that's needed to treat the harm. Okay. Okay. And so if they say that, and so if you say that, our product, maybe has a 50% chance of giving someone a slash on their face, right? And then the way that you can quantify that magnitude of the harm is to say that, if a person got slashed in the face, and they had to go to the hospital to get stitches, how much would that cost on average? And then you can just plug that value into the equation on the previous page. Okay. And so, I will say that's one way that you can quantify this, and it is a way that you can get a number. Whether that's ethically or morally correct is I would say I would personally disagree with that. Okay, because there's a lot of things that can happen that you can't really put a price tag on. Yeah, you can there's some accidents or some harms that can that you can fix with a medical procedure. But that has no way of quantifying the psychological, emotional harms or what kinds of changes or change to their quality of life that they have to sustain, that they have to, undergo. Yeah. And yeah, that's another thing too. I mean, and, for certain applications that's dealing with, people's lives that are in danger, some people think about, how much is a funeral going to cost and, how, and to factor that into their calculations as well. If you've been following recent events, there was a concert in Houston. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, where people died because basically the safety and the crowd control was not good. And so, the artist, ended up paying for their funeral costs. But, if I think, if you can kind of get into his head for a little bit to say that, if the cost of me, improving the security at this venue, if that's going to be less than the cost, if that's going to be more than the cost of, paying for a few people's funerals, then, financially that's a, a good decision to make. But obviously it's the ethically and morally wrong thing to do, right? Because, there's, I think there's 10 people now who lost their lives at that concert. So yeah, it was horrible tragedy. So, I would say there's, this view of acceptable risk, I think there's places for it, and, and I won't say that it's not good anywhere. But you really have to, think about if this is appropriate to put, human lives or human harms, in this kind of cold, calculating circumstances. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. And so that's one way that you can define acceptable risk. Okay. And so another way that you can view it is to take what's called a capabilities approach. Okay. Okay. All right. And so, I bring this one up because, when people think of harms, right? And so when people think of hurting themselves through, using engineering devices, they usually think of, I would say, the extremes. And so, when you think of harming yourself, some people maybe think of, maybe you spilled a hot cup of coffee on your lap or something like that. And, yeah, it burns and stuff like that, but, and it hurts, but, then you kind of walk away for it. Or they think of the other extreme where, people just die and then, they're not able to live their lives anymore. Okay. And so, there's other ways that you can think of harms that goes beyond just pain and death. Okay. And so that has to do with the capabilities of a certain individual. Okay. Okay. And so if we define capabilities, capabilities are defined as the ability of people to lead the kind of life they have reason to value. Okay. Okay. And so, this kind of gives a little bit more nuance in terms of, how your engineering products are affecting people's lives, right? Because people just aren't on this earth to just live and die and feel pain, right? And so, we engage in a lot of activities in our lives to give them meaning, right? And so if we think about, the ways our engineering products can affect these capabilities, it kind of gives a little bit of a different perspective on harms and what they can do, right? Because yes, it's true, you can design an engineering product that won't, hurt or maim or kill someone, right? But it can affect them in a lot of different ways. And I think, thinking about these capabilities, kind of puts a different spin on, how we design our products and how we think, and more importantly, how we think about acceptable risk. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. and so how do we define capabilities? Because, of course, this definition is a lot more broad, more than just, hurting or killing someone, right? And so the way that we usually think of capabilities is we usually look at indicators, okay? Okay. Because, the activities that give, one person meaning in their life is going to be different from the next person, right? And so to do that for every single person is really difficult and almost impossible to factor into your risk decision-making process, okay? And so it's better to kind of look at indicators as kind of a way to quantify, the capabilities for people to live their lives, okay? And so as an example, as a one indicator, let's think about the capability for a person to exercise. Okay? Okay. And so for a lot of people, being able to exercise and be physically fit is something that's really important to them. It gives their life a lot of meaning. Okay. And so, the way that you can quantify this is, often difficult for your engineering project because, how would you even go about, saying if how your product is helping them exercise or not. Okay. And so a better indicator for this is to say that, a lot of times people like to go exercising in the outdoors, right? Maybe less often so now because there's more options people do at home. But one way that we can find an indicator is how well can this person access facilities like a park or a gym? Okay. Okay. And so if your engineering product, affects the access to these facilities, right? So let's think about, let's say that you're performing works on the road, right? And so you're redoing some of the asphalt on the roads, and it's going to cause some traffic in a certain area, right? And so that's kind of one thing that you have to consider, right? And so if you're gonna restrict people's access to these facilities, you're also, you're harming their capabilities to live a life that they want to live. Okay. Okay. Because if you're working for a construction company and you're doing work on the road, you usually don't think about, how this is affecting, the public in terms of their harms, right? Because, as long as people stay outside the construction zone, no citizen is going to hurt themselves in your construction work, okay? But it does affect, other parts of their lives, and it affects their capabilities, and that's one thing that you should take into account when you're planning your products, okay? And so another thing like this is, I think we're in the age now where people are talking about, self-driving cars or automated driving cars, right? And so you have to think about, if there's a lot of these cars that are going to be on the road, through your service, how is that going to affect, the access to certain places that other people want to do as well, okay? And so anytime you're considering like a public space, or if your product is affecting like a public space, then that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Okay. And so with that in mind, let's kind of give a different definition or a different perspective on this idea of acceptable risk. Okay. And so we can say that a risk is acceptable if the probability is sufficiently small okay, that the adverse effects of the hazard will fall below a threshold that doesn't affect the capabilities of the people involved. Okay. Okay. All right, and so this is kind of another way that you can define acceptable risk. Okay. All right. Any questions of this? Okay. All right, and so that's, those are two different ways that as an engineer, you can think about, how you can define risk to be acceptable or not in your engineering product. Okay. Next, let's talk about other people's perception of risk. Okay, because because a lot of times engineers are not the only ones that are making decisions on whether a product is safe or not. Okay, so first let's talk about the what I like to call the general public. All right. And so, up to this point, we've been talking about as engineers, what can we consider or how should we look at our products in terms of risk and safety, okay? But a lot of times this perspective or this understanding is different than what the public understands or perceives about your product, okay? Okay. And what is deemed an acceptable risk by the public might be very different than what is deemed an acceptable risk by the engineer. Okay. Okay. And, oftentimes there's a big disconnect. Okay. And so there's a disconnect between, how the public views certain technology versus how engineers view certain technology. Okay. And the big difference, and, the reason there's a disconnect is kind of in a difference of, I would say kind of technical knowledge or technical expertise. Okay. Okay. And this is understandable, right? And so, we've talked about this before that, it takes a lot of work to become an engineer, right? It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of education, right? And so most of the public does not have that same education. So to expect the public to have, a working understanding of how their combustion engine works is very unreasonable, right? And so, I can say that even myself, that, even someone that teaches mechanical engineering, I don't think I have a full understanding of how my engine works either, and so to expect the public to do so too is very, unreasonable. And because of that, they're going to have different perceptions of how things work or not. Okay, and that's something that we just have to accept. Okay, it's not something, it's not something that we can, try to change. Of course, we should try to inform people, but, to expect people to have really strong working knowledge of all the technology that they use is really unreasonable. Okay, and what further complicates this is this whole idea called anchoring. Okay. Okay. And so I think, with the way the world is right now, I think everyone's familiar with what this term is. Maybe we haven't used this exact term for it, but it's this idea that, people tend to latch on to an initial impression or initial estimate, and then kind of just and never be convinced of that. Okay. Okay. And so, the reason that we call it anchoring is because they're anchored in that kind of initial belief. Okay. And so maybe they heard from someone about, how dangerous it is to use microwaves, right? And no matter how much you try to convince them that microwaves are safe, they're going to be latched onto that initial impression. Okay. It's even more complicated nowadays because I think with social media and how, the internet is, I think it's a lot easier for people to find the conclusions or find the narratives that they want to hear, more so than the facts, right? And so it's getting more and more difficult to get away from this. And I think, everyone's guilty of this as well. Okay. One kind of lighthearted way that even I've experienced this is my resistance to new cooking technology, right? And so some of you may know this about me, but I really enjoy cooking. And so it's something I learned from my mom, something I learned from my grandma, and it's something I enjoy a lot. But in recent years, there's been a lot of new cooking kitchen devices that have come out, things like an air fryer, right, that are really trendy. Okay, but I'm very, my friends say I'm a hater. So they say I like hating on air fryers, which is not true. I teach a heat transfer class, so I know how an air fryer works. It's just that I just don't find that it's necessary in my kitchen. When I have a toaster oven and a frying pan and an oven, right? I just don't see that it's necessary to have an air fryer. And so, I'm very anchored in my ways of cooking that I don't want to accept any new technology, even though factually I can say for sure that an air fryer is a superior device than a toaster oven. But I've had this toaster oven for like over 10 years now, and I don't want to throw it away. Yeah, I know. Everyone is obsessed with the air fryer. So I'm not hating on it. Okay, so it's a fine device. It's just for me personally. I like to use the toaster oven. But all my friends say that I'm a hater and I'm anchored in old ways and things like that. So people are going to be anchored in things like that. And once people kind of latch onto an idea or perception, it can be really hard to kind of latch them away from that. Yeah. $79.99. Oh, it's a good deal, I know, but my toaster oven is still working, it's still cooking, so I'm going to use that until it dies. Instant Pot too, yeah, that's another popular one. Another device that I probably won't get anytime soon because I have a rice cooker. I've had it for 10 years. It works great, and I'm going to keep using it. Right? All right. Okay, and so this is important to know because if you're coming out with a new technology or you're if you're an engineer, say you're designing air fryers, right? You just got to deal with you just got to know that you're gonna have to deal with people like me, right? People that are anchored in their old ways and don't want to try something new. Okay. And so I picked a very lighthearted example for this because I know that there's a lot of more serious and even political way examples that we can talk about anchoring, but this is an engineering class. I don't want to talk about any kind of political stuff. So, I'm going to try to keep it lighthearted when I can. Okay. That's right. There's so economic life on my toaster oven. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. And so another important factor that you have to consider with the public is that they don't really make a distinction between risk and acceptable risk. Okay. And so we've kind of been, kind of towing the line, in this lecture about, defining what is a risk versus an acceptable risk. Okay. But the public doesn't always see it like that. Okay. Right. And so I'd say that's kind of another big misconception that the public has, that as engineers, we know that anytime you use a device, there's always going to be a level of risk to that, right? But I think a lot of people just don't realize how much risk that they're putting themselves through, by using these devices. And so as soon as you say that you risk something by using this device, then that's enough to make people go whoa, and then kind of back away. Okay. And a lot of that is understandable because a lot of times these risks are relatively unknown to them, right? And so they don't really understand these risks. Okay. And so anytime you have a risk and you don't fully understand it, that's always going to be a really scary thing. Okay. And so that's another thing that you have to keep in mind too, that you have to be really careful about how you communicate the risks of your product, just kind of based on how people will react. Okay. I remember, I bought a water bottle once, and then it came with a warning tag that said, the materials used in this water bottle have been known to cause cancer, right? And then, it scared me so much that I didn't end up using that water bottle, even though it was a nice water bottle. But I didn't know at the time, right? And so, I think legally the manufacturers are required to put that notice in there, but what they don't tell you is that, the chance of you actually getting cancer are so negligibly small that it's perfectly fine to use a water bottle that you bought at Target. Okay. And so that's one example of there's risk involved there, but it's obviously a very acceptable level of risk because even though the plastics that they use in the water bottle can cause cancer, the chance of it actually happening to you just drinking water is so small that it's basically negligible. Okay. Okay. And so one way to kind of improve public perception of engineering technology in terms of the risks is to obtain free and informed consent. Okay. And so we talked about this last time too, right? And so if you inform people of what the risks are involved and they fully understand it and they accept it, then the perceived amount of risk is going to be smaller, and they're more they're going to be more willing to accept what those risks are. Okay. And so that's kind of the purpose of the of the privacy agreements of whenever you sign up for a new app, right? Of course, that's a whole nother problem entirely, because I can say for sure that that the vast majority of people that read those privacy warnings are not reading it all the way, and so most people are not aware of of what risks that they're taking by using a certain app. Okay. All right. And one other consideration too is that if you're designing a product that's going to put people at risk, but also provide some benefit, that these two should correspond. Okay. Okay. And so from an ethical perspective, if you're asking people, and this mostly is with regards to your staff, right? And so if you're asking contractors, or you're asking engineers to put their lives at risk to to either produce a product or produce a service, they have to share in some of the benefits as well. Okay. Because it's really not fair to expose workers or to expose people to certain risks without giving them some kind of benefit in return. Okay. All right. And so those are kind of the I would say the public viewpoints on risk. Okay. And so for the last 5 minutes, unfortunately we have to move on to the next topic after this, but there's kind of a lot more that I want to discuss about risk. I do want to talk about the role of the government regulators. Okay. Because they're also a big player in all this. Okay. Because the government's job is to ultimately protect the people of their country, right? And so part of that is imposing regulations and imposing laws on new and emerging technologies. Okay. Okay. And so with that in mind, regulators, they typically have two approaches to their work. Okay. All right. And so the first approach that they can take is what I like to call like a wait and see approach. Okay. Okay. And so with this approach, let's consider a situation, right? So let's say that a new company comes out with a new app or a new app on their phones, right? And so it does something new and unique that no other app has done before, okay? And so if the regulators wanted to take a wait and see approach, they could let this app, come to market, okay? And they can let people, let the developers sell it on the App Store, okay? And then they kind of, because it's new, it's kind of hard to really get a good estimate or a good assessment of what the risks are, okay? And so that's kind of the mindset with wait and see, is that whenever you have some kind of new technology or new service, it's difficult to get a good assessment of the risks. Okay. Okay. And part of that is because it's so new. And so, what with this approach, the government kind of lets this technology, in a sense, just go out there in the wild and see what effects that it has on people. Okay. And then based on the consequences that people experience, then they can start to pass laws that that protect people from some of the bad things that are occurring. Okay. Okay. And so in general, the engineers and developers like this approach better, because this lets their technology get out there unimpeded, no regulations and everything like that. And a lot of times it helps them make a lot of money too. Okay. All right. So that's one way that government regulators can approach their work. Okay. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. And so the other way that they can approach their work is to take what I like to call a proactive stance. Okay. And so with the proactive stance, the governments are going to impose regulations, before the technology hits the broader market. Okay. And so this kind of takes an approach of, let's just stop any bad things from happening to begin with. Okay. And so obviously, this approach here prioritizes more the public safety, but it might stifle some innovation. It might stifle some of the market. Okay. All right. And so I know we're out of time. And so let me just make one quick comment. Okay. And so in general, and not all government agencies do this. And so, the government is a very large and complex being with lots of different agencies and departments and stuff like that. But in general, most regulating agencies will take this approach right here. Okay. And so most times they're going to prioritize public safety over, innovation and over the technology. Okay. And so that's something to keep in mind, where like if you're developing a product that's that seems really, really new and really exciting, you can probably expect some regulations to come your way before you can actually bring that technology to the market. Okay. All right. Any final questions on this? Okay. All right. And so that's all we got time for. And so there is more out there that I want to talk about with in terms of risk and safety. But that's kind of all we have time for. And so starting on Thursday, we're actually going to start talking about business ethics. Okay. And so how do you conduct yourself, just as a professional employee, what your relationship with your manager is going to be like, and how to act, within the company ethically. Okay. right, so thank you guys for tuning in. And so remember, if you're not part of a group yet for the final project, make sure you sign up for one. And if you can't find a group, let me know, and I can either put you into a group or find it for you. Okay. And then the due date for the agreement of shared responsibility is tonight. So make sure you turn that in as well. Okay. All right. Have a great day, everyone. And I'll see you on Thursday. Yeah. 441 exam. So I haven't started grading those yet. So I have to do some things for the department. I'm hoping to get it done before the lecture tomorrow. But if not, it'll be done by Thursday for sure. Yeah. Yep. Thanks, guys. Take care.